Hi, folks. Welcome to Crisco's Corner. Welcome back. And those of you that are new, welcome. I found this on Twitter. It's a exchange on CNN between one of our favorite grifters / morons, Don Lemon, a.k.a. Don Lemon. And he's talking to a Brit concerning reparations and how Prince William now takes over his father's $1 billion estate and there's no taxes. And what about reparations? That's the thing that's been going on here in the U.S. for decades, even a century. Reparations for slavery. You owe us. Since 80+% of the people currently in the United States have no descendants that even were involved in slavery or even lived in the time of slavery, we live in a society that slavery built. And so we have enriched ourselves from the foundation of slavery, and we owe these people reparations. So that means if my great-great-great-great-grandfather burned down your family's business, I owe you reparations for what they did back then. Oh, okay. But it's fascinating. Let's take a listen here because she gives him a quick history lesson, and it's funny to see the look on his face. Let's listen.
And then you have those who are asking for reparations for colonialism, and they're wondering, $100 billion, $24 billion here and there, $500 million there. Some people want to be paid back, and members of the public are wondering, why are we suffering when you are, you have all of this vast wealth? Those are legitimate concerns.
Well, I think you're right about reparations in terms of if people want it, though.
Now, she says, you're right about reparations. And you see his head come up a little bit. He's trying to stay as stiff as possible, you can tell. He's going out of his way not to show any emotion. But later, as she's talking, and that video isn't that long, he's talking, looks like he's having a little gas pain. He's a little uncomfortable with the truth. In history is not so black and white. There's a lot of gray. Let's listen.
What they need to do is you always need to go back to the beginning of a supply chain. Where was the beginning of the supply chain? That was in Africa. And when across the entire world, when the slavery was taking place, which was the first nation in the world that abolished slavery? The first nation in the world to abolish it. It was started by William Wilberforce, was the British. In Great Britain, they abolished slavery. 2,000 naval men died on the high seas trying to stop slavery. Why? Because the African kings were rounding up their own people. They had them on cages waiting in the beaches. No one was running into Africa to get them. And I think you're totally right. If reparations need to be paid, we need to go right back to the beginning of that supply chain and say who was rounding up their own people and having them handcuffed in cages.
Whoops. The truth. There's nobody cleaning the slavery issue. Nobody. And here's the thing. They say it's a racial thing, black and white racial thing. That's why there was slaves. The fact of the matter is 95% of the slavery in the world was not black on white slaves. In other words, white slaveholders and black slaves. That's a lie. It's not true. And in fact, it wasn't up until, I believe, 1974, the year I got out of high school, that Saudi Arabia, at least officially, made slavery against the law in Saudi Arabia. So let's not kid ourselves here. And not just the British, she's talking about 2,000 British officers, I should say naval personnel, died trying to stop slavery. You see at the end of the movie Amistad, the slave castle was bombarded by British ships. And everybody said it didn't exist, it didn't exist. And then after they bombarded it into rubble, and the British freed all the slaves that were held there, and this is long after the American Civil War, he said, tell the commander he was right. The slave castle, I believe it was in Sierra Leone, does not exist. In other words, it did exist, but I just bombarded it into rubble. And many American ships went to the Middle East and an African continent in the 1870s, 80s, 90s to stop slavery. That's where the slavery really was. Was there horrific things that happened with slavery in the United States? Yes. But you have to put it into scale. You have to put it into times. You can't put today's modern thinking and social construct into 200-year-old society. You can't do it. If you really want to look at who's the most barbaric by far was Spain. The hundreds of thousands they butchered and just worked to death and threw them into ditches and then grabbed another one and worked them. You didn't last 3 or 4 years. How come nobody's going after Spain? They were the worst of the worst of the worst. See, here's the problem. It's only horrific slavery. Reparations are only demanded if it's non-white slaves in the Western world, i.e., in this case, Western Europe and the United States, have to make reparations. Or the rest of the countries in the world and the African kings and tribal leaders that rounded up their enemies and sometimes their own people to be sold into chattel slavery across the Atlantic to what was then British colonies and other parts of America. The Spaniards did 50 times that in South America on their huge plantations. So let's cut through this. Nobody is clean. So you want reparations? But they only want reparations from white people that they feel responsible. We're over 95% of slavery in the world at that time, and including today, is non-white people. You're going to have these countries in Africa come up with these billions and billions of dollars? Of course not, because they don't count, because they're not white. As I said before, nobody is clean. And reparations is a pipe dream. It's a way to bludgeon races you don't like. It's sophisticated racism. You owe us from ancestors' past practices. No, we don't. You can't make it clean. But we did do in the United States, because we had over 600,000 Americans die to end slavery, and over 50,000 civilians die. If you punch that into today's numbers as a percent of the American population, that would be over 6 million dead. Not counting the misery that it caused for generations after that. The Civil Rights Acts of the 1960s and all the social upheaval that came from that, and we come out the other side. No, there is no systemic racism anymore, Don, or any other so-called black leaders. That's a lie. It's a lie to pound your enemies over the head. And it's racist. It's taking white people and making them the devil. And that is racist. History is never black and white. There's a lot of gray. Open a book sometime, Don. Take a look at what really happened. Until the next time, goodbye and good luck.